ParaMOOC2024. I'm Nan Zingroni, one of the founders of this ParaMOOC series. And we are going to start our 2 weeks of exploring the psychic experiences of children. Normally our ParaMOOC is a little bit 24. I'm Nan Zingroni, one of the founders of this ParaMOOC series. And we are going to start our 2 weeks of exploring the psychic experiences of children. Normally our ParaMOOC is a little bit longer, but because of my schedule and things like that, we could only do the 2 weeks. And I think it's going to be a great 2 weeks. We've got a really good lineup here of people that are very interesting. And that theme that we had last year of having some clinical psychologists and therapists along to talk about how these experiences impact on people, that's carrying through all the way on this particular version of ParaMOOC. As you probably know, the ParaMOOC series started in 2015 and it ran till 2020, and then Brian Williams and Natasha Chisdis and I picked it back up again last year in 2023. I first would like to say thank you to the Parapsychology Foundation and to Lisa Coley and Anastasia Demalis. They have always supported the ParaMOOC project, both financially and, more importantly, morally, and we're so grateful to have them in our corner. I also would like to thank Radiant Skies, who is the artist that put this wordle together, which we use as our logo, and we license that from 123rf.com, one of my favorite stock image places. And today we have Jeannie Lagle, am I saying that right? Jeannie Lagle Dollar. Let me move forward.
Yes.
Oh, good. I was going to call you and ask you because I didn't want to do that wrong. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about our speaker for today. Jeannie Lagle Dollar has enjoyed a successful career as a medical speech pathologist, and prior to and throughout her lifetime has dedicated herself to working clinical psychology and parapsychology. She began with the Psychical Research Foundation, which used to be in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and with Bill Roll, William G. Roll, who eventually ended up down in Georgia. With Bill, she first met Christina Boyer in 1984. Jeannie graduated with a BS in Speech Pathology and Audiology in 1976 from Auburn University. In 1979, she completed the Master's in Humanistic Psychology from West Georgia College. She later received the MS in Communication Sciences Disorders in 1994 from the University of Alabama. Her talk today is called RSPK and the Case of Christina Boyer. This presentation focuses on the period from 1984 to the present, when Jeannie participated in and is still participating in the first scientific research of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis to continue with such a long duration, providing highly significant results in ongoing phenomena. We are so grateful to have Jeannie here today, and I know we're all looking forward to your talk.
Okay. Are you ready, Brian?
I think so, Jeannie. Just let me know when you'd like to advance to the next slide.
Okay. And I have the presentation on my tablet in front of me, so I'll know where we are.
Okay.
And hello to everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to share this case with you. It is, as was introduced, as far as anybody knows, the longest studied case of RSPK. And then also at the time that we did the experiments, I think maybe the only case of RSPK that had been investigated under experimental conditions, but Brian can correct me on that. I know there were J.B. Ryan's place and Foundation on the Research of the Nature of Man, they tried to do computer generated RSPK type things, but that wasn't exactly what we did. But I want to divide today's presentation, and let's go to the next slide, Brian. Joan's bedroom. And the reason that you're seeing this is because the way Tina was discovered was through a call from the Columbus Dispatch journalist that had visited the house when the spontaneous psychokinesis began to occur in the house. Now, it didn't all occur just in this one room. This is just one room where William Roll was with her and and was able to witness things. Prior to that, according to the family, many things, dramatic kind of things had happened. Dishes had fallen out of cabinets. There was even a report of an egg going through the refrigerator wall, and pictures falling off the wall, house plants falling over, coming out of their pots. But interestingly enough, just as what my experience was, you didn't necessarily see things happen as they happened. So in this room, let me back up. The reporter was called by Joan, her adopted mother, because Joan had just been featured in the Columbus Dispatch as a foster mother of the year type thing. And so she didn't know what to do. And I believe they called in their pastor, who didn't know what to do either. And some things did happen while he was there. And then she called this journalist to come to get a picture. And he did get a picture. We will see it later. The famous flying phone picture. But he was the one that ended up calling this Foundation on the Research of the Nature of Man, who got them connected with Bill Roll, who was the poltergeist specialist. So Bill goes to be a witness. And I want people to just see that in this photo, you have a dresser and you have a bed. And in this room, two things happened with Bill present. One had to do with some pliers and one had to do with a tape recorder. So just remember that. And now we can go to the next slide because it shows a little bit better. So by now, Bill's on the scene, and that's a picture had just literally fallen from the wall, from its place. So Tina and Bill are over where the picture had been. And you can see by the diagram that the tape recorder, Bill carried with him all the time. Well, he had put it down to go deal with the picture. And it's behind them, as you can see circled, and it ends up out in the hallway. And also a pair of pliers that they were using. So let's go to the next slide. And you see the tape recorder ends up just on the floor from the dresser and out in the hallway, landing on the floor, and then move to the next slide. And it shows that the pliers that were also on the dresser ends up out in, this is, I think, kind of out in the hallway where they're Bill is squatting and she's standing. So they had to go out. It had to go out of the room for that one. And that was my experience. Things did not happen like the movie Poltergeist or Carrie or Ghostbusters. It was nothing dramatic. And if anything, everybody gets if just this one thing from this, I'll feel like I will have done my job today. And that is to show the actual characteristics of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis and psychokinesis. And in so doing, I believe people can see that this is not, this is a very subtle phenomenon. The way this phenomena acts is in a very subtle way. It's not at all dangerous. You're not going to get hurt. Nobody ever, there was never, it was all so quiet and subtle like that, that it was almost anticlimactic because of all the media hype that we have about all that kind of stuff. The good news was that it was so benign in my experience, being around those things as they happened, that it was actually delightful, because I felt like Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, honestly, that my whole world of understanding of physics had suddenly been turned upside down. So that was pretty exciting. And it wasn't, nobody got hurt. It was very benign. So moving to the next slide. Okay, so I was totally wrong about the pliers. This part of the story, I wasn't there, so I know I get it mixed up. But as you can see, it reads in this line that the pliers move from the dresser and strike the headboard of the bed 6 feet away before landing on the floor beside the bed. So again, you see, this is not, no spontaneous combustions or anything. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. This is a picture that the photojournalist Fred Shannon, well, Mike Harden actually took it, and Fred Shannon came out there too. It's called the flying phone photo, famously because you see a phone, it looks like it's flying through the air. Now this photo is the only photo that I know of, and the only time that I know of that anything that moved was actually seen in midair. Otherwise, like I said, it happens in such subtle ways. Something would be on one thing, for example, the dresser, and then the next thing you know, it's over on the other side of the room. And there may be a sound associated with it, but it's not, sometimes it's not even broken, whatever the object is. So this picture was captured by this journalist sitting there with his camera on the floor, because this seems to be camera shy, psychokinesis is. And it's been very hard. We were never able to get any actual pictures in our experiments either during the down times and when spontaneous activity occurred, because every time you pulled out a camera, it just nothing happened. And I guess that psychologically, here we go again, psychologically, she was 14 years old, turning 15, and it was like someone who was camera shy and didn't like to have her picture taken. Now, Mike got it, as he said he had the camera on the floor. He was pretending to not pay attention, and as soon as he thought he saw a movement from his eye, he reached down and snapped a shot, and this is what he got. It is also true that at that time, and you can move to the next slide, that besides Bill Roll, another gentleman, the amazing James Randi, came to the house. He heard about it, and he and Carl Sagan had a group called PsyCop, and their sole mission in life was to debunk the paranormal. James Randi simulated psychokinesis and other paranormal things. And so he believed that it was all fraudulent and that she was fraudulent. So he came to the house and wanted to come in, and he was not allowed in. After we did our experiments, he also invited us to come to California, to his lab, which we did, just to do a presentation. But he wanted us to also do the experiments in his lab under his conditions for $1 million. And we said, yeah, right. I'm sure your conditions are going to be a bit rigged since that's your job. Anyway, this is just an example of from the 1984. As soon as this spontaneous stuff started happening, she got a lot of media attention, and that has not stopped since. In fact, even as recently as last August, I believe it was, there was a docuseries that came out about her, which is that every experience we have is what is still is in us, and we can access. And through trauma treatment methods, I believed that that it would be possible to do that. So, in fact, to make a long story short, that's what happened. She and I, the first day that we were to do the experiments that you're looking at the pictures now, that's Tina with the short hair, with her arms outstretched at one of the devices, and that is the man with the beard is our neurobiologist who set up one of the experimental devices, and that's me with the ponytail looking at one of them with him. And so what I did was I had her go back to the time at her home when some things were happening, because she had reported to me somatic symptoms, especially in the area of the abdomen, and what I would consider neurologically a vagal response. And she did have seizure disorder ran in her family. And so I had her imagine that in her abdominal area, that as she began to have sensations in that area, because that would indicate that the psychokinesis was happening or going to happen. And she would imagine that area was red. And then I had her go through the rainbow, and I had her visualize that as she would go from red to blue through each color, that the effect would reduce and stop. And that was going to be her suggestion and her visualization for controlling it, to visualize the circle in her solar plexus, abdominal area, and we start out with blue, increase it through the rainbow to red. At that time, we're suggesting that the psychokinesis is now accessible. And then when we want to stop it, we again visualize the red and take it to the blue. And then we assume that when it gets to the blue, the psychokinesis is no longer accessible. So what happened was, when she would look at and hold her hands out and do whatever she wanted to do besides touch anything, I was also standing there coaching her with this visualization. Now, the two experimental designs, briefly, one was a sea-slug cell that was still firing. That's a neurobiologists like them because they have a long firing life after you extract them. And so that was under the microscope in a slide, and it was firing. It was hooked up to like a polygraph so that it could measure on a piece of paper the regular firing of the sea-slug cell. And her job was to increase the firing of the cell, and we would be able to tell that by the meter sizes and then drawings and then to slow it down and to even stop it and then start it back. And she was able to do that, just in a nutshell. The other thing that she had to do was there was a crystal and that was in a bell jar, and it was also hooked up to an electrode, and she had to make it move under a piece of filter paper, and she was. And that was using the visualization. Okay, the next slide is just a picture of her when the first time when they were doing the EEG. So now the next slide is a layout of the office where we did the experiments. The reason that you're looking at this is because in between the experimental periods, she would, for example, spend 30 minutes on one device trying to affect it and with the hypnosis, suggestion, visualization, coaching going on. Then we would take a break for 30 minutes. Now, in parapsychology, there's a term called release of effort. And I think that maybe Ryan can correct me on this or not. J.B. Ryan came up with that in some of their work. And what that means is that when you quit trying, things happen. So, and definitely when in between trying to intentionally make things happen in the experimental designs, when we would be sitting, say, like in office 1, which was right across the room from the experiments, things would start moving just while we were sitting there spontaneously. And the experiments were in one room. Office 1, there was a utility cart that had tools like pliers, a 10-volt battery, for example, some other tools like that. And one by one, each of those things, as we sat there just chatting with each other, I think having lunch, we would hear a sound and we would go into another room down the hall to like office 3, or even we turned office 2 into experimental room, even though there were no experiments in there, because so much stuff from office 1 kept ending up in room 2, just would end up there. And the 10-volt battery actually ended up with completely wedged into the wall in office 3. So we had to pull that out of the wall. Now, let me say, I never saw anything in a line of flight. So if something was in office 1, it would have had to have gone out the door, taken a right, and then taken another left into office 3, and then forcefully, so much force that it literally embedded itself into the wall in office 3, a 10-volt battery, without much noise otherwise. I think I would hear a sound that to me was similar to like a sonic boom type thing. And to me, that it was more of something like being in one spot materially and then reappearing in another spot materially. So that's the reason I wanted to show this layout, that so much happens spontaneously from really office 1, and it went to these other rooms. And so to try to explain it in normal line of sight physics is, not possible. I've talked to physics about it before, and all I get from them is that, well, they don't believe me, it's either I'm a fraud, she's a fraud, somebody is a fraud. Okay, so that happened, and we wrote that up. We were feeling pretty good about it. The thing that we wanted to do was what next? And at that point, we were getting calls from all kinds of people having other kinds of problems, especially haunting type experiences. And that's when Bill and even Tina and I, Bill and I especially, would consult with families. And I believe this group is really interested in that, to have what we call psi sessions with them. And I would describe them as a combination of a seance type methodology and a Gestalt group therapy. So we did some of that after this. She went back to Ohio after this, and she was very, very unhappy there. And so by now she's 15. She visited myself and Bill a couple of times, but by 17, I think she was out of the house. And 18, I think she had had Amber, her little girl. But the father of the child was not able to take care of the child, so she did not live with him. But if you want to move to the next slide, that is a picture of Tina with Amber, and that was right, maybe about a year before Amber died, actually, because Tina did meet the man whose last name is Boyer, and married him. Amber's last name was Bennett. That's her father's last name. Mr. Boyer turned out to be an abusive husband to Tina, and she called me and said things were happening spontaneously. The psychokinesis was really happening a lot. She was under a lot of stress. Could she come to Georgia and be where we were? Because we understood her case and how to be with her. And that was just, for me, she was just another young woman, that no different than anybody else. This was not a scary, harmful thing. It was definitely unusual. It was remarkable, just that anything moves at all like that without anybody touching it. But it was not something that I at all would have defined as anything pathological. The only thing pathological about it was the response from the world to her because of it. Now, the bottom picture is a picture of Bill Roll and his wife Lydia with Tina and Amber, and they're in front of the country club where Bill lived. So anyway, I think that's the last photo, right, Brian?
Yeah, that's the last one.
Okay. Now, Christina is currently, and has been for 32 years, incarcerated for the death of Amber. After she moved to Georgia, we helped her get housing, and we helped her start building a life in Georgia. And Amber was a very, very energetic child. And I suspected, and Tina did too, that she had that same kind of energy that Tina seemed to have about her, because she was very intense energy wise. She's a very sweet, loving person, but energy wise, she's very intense. And so was Amber. And Amber ran. She never walked. She ran. Well, one day, she fell and she hit her head. And Tina was working in my office at the time. I saw her almost every day and the child. And she had a new boyfriend who was a very nice man, had a 3-year-old also. Well, in a matter of days, Amber, while Christina was at my house working and her boyfriend was babysitting, Amber lay down for a nap and did not wake up. And long story short, they went to the emergency room with her. I went with them, and the police, before the detectives even got to the hospital, somebody somewhere decided that it was a homicide. Even though I was there saying that I was aware of several falls that she'd had over the last few days. And in fact, the autopsy revealed that she had an intracranial bleed from the first fall where she hit her head. And over the next few days, the bleed continued until it ended up pooling in her at the base of her skull and her midbrain, and it caused her to have sudden death. Well, they were immediately accused of it, of beating her to death. And there was no indication, there was no weapon, there was no nothing that showed that. And I was there as a witness to when she fell and the markings that showed that she had fallen. And I was really completely ignored by the DA, the prosecutor, and the police, and everyone, and her defender. I really, all of these years have been completely ignored as far as my witness and my testimony regarding how Amber died. So Christina wants to call in at like I said, at 5 o'clock and share with this audience the number of incidences that she still has at the prison and how she handles them. And also an overview of how it was for her at 14 when this happened in her house, and how this journey has been for her over all these years, especially as she's been incarcerated. Now, with the last few minutes, though, I would love for anyone that wants to ask me a question about her case or anything else that has to do with counseling and working with individuals that have these paranormal experiences.
If anybody would like to turn their video on or leave it off and open up their Patrick, I see that you have your mic going. If you would like to ask Jeannie a question.
Yeah, so I've been running with a case in a friend's house of mine, and I was using some SLS, and it seems that something is attached to a chair that has in his bedroom, but there's multiple of that. I'm trying to figure out what else to possibly do.
I don't know if anybody else can hear you clearly, but I can't. You're sort of coming and going.
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Yeah, that's better. But a little bit louder, maybe.
Can you hear me now?
That seems to be a bit better.
Hold on.
Okay, would you repeat what you just
Let's try
said?
this. Can you hear me now?
No,
Yes.
much better. Yes.
Okay. So like I said, I've been running a case of my own at a friend's house. I was doing some SLS imaging. I have found that there's multiple spirits in the bedroom, but something is attached to this chair that he has. It'll stay right there. It won't. It just won't move. The thing I'm trying to figure out is what do I do about it, because he doesn't want them to go, and the house that he lives in is over 100 years old. Sometimes, like, I feel like there's something there that can cause the depression, anger, but I'm not sure who it is. How do I fix that? Because he does sometimes get temperamental.
Did you say that the person who lives in the house does not want that the entity to leave?
Yeah. He doesn't mind them because he believes that this was their house before it was his. And over the years, actually, as a matter of fact, the house that he lives in used to be an old doctor's office. And they've taken patients there that have either died or were dying and died there. But it's only in his bedroom. It's very rarely ever downstairs in like the what is now the living room or the dining room, not even the kitchen. So I'm trying to figure out what to do and how to figure out who the spirit is that it has the emotion of depression, anger. He's also had some dreams that have, I don't want to say that are disturbing, but one of them involves a child that he's like soaking wet, like drenched, like he was in a pool or something like that. But in this dream, he takes my friend by the hand and jumps off the roof. So I'm trying to figure out what to do from here and figure out how, like, can they become dangerous or what?
Well, I had a very similar case of a woman who was experiencing a presence that actually felt like the presence touched her sexually at night, and all over her, and she was homosexual, and so at first she really didn't like that, but then I suggested that when I would suggest things to do to say goodbye to this entity, she seemed reluctant. And so as a psychologist, think of it like this. If you have someone that's coming to you to change a behavior, and they're telling you, but I really don't want to change the behavior. I kind of like it, actually. It's kind of cool. It's kind of a cool thing for my life. Then I would believe them. And what I would do as a psychologist is indirectly connect what you're sensing and your patient is sensing from this entity, the depression, the anger, etc. That ask your patient, or do you ever have an experience in which you feel like whatever that you can ask your entity, whatever he calls it, ask him to name it. That's always a good start. And that is that something that and explain to them that I don't really want you to go, but I feel that there's this depression and this anger, and then ask your patient to be open to any thoughts or feelings that come to them, and just share. You don't lead them to say, oh, well, this probably has something to do with you, actually, but you say what comes to you as you talk to this entity about this entity's depression and anger. And in my experience, that's why I would say our side sessions were a combination of seance style, group direction, and also Gestalt therapy, because Gestalt therapy is basically like talking to the empty chair. And if you're talking, he literally has a chair to talk to.
He was laying in bed, and he recently had a heart attack. Well, not recently, but he had a heart attack about 10 years ago. And he said, like, yesterday something was sitting on his chest. So I ran the SLS again, and it was kind of hard to tell because of the fact that when you run an SLS, if it's somebody that's alive, that image is going to, or the stick figure is going to remain still or in the shape of somebody that's alive. Well, when I ran the SLS, there was the stick figure that was constantly moving, like it was jumping on him or something, or sitting on his chest. but it wouldn't stop moving.
Okay, now I am an old lady, and I don't know what an SLS is.
An SLS is a piece of equipment that paranormal investigators use to, they're able to locate spirits in a either a residential or commercial building. But they're not as easy as you think they are to use, because an SLS camera can pick up anything and make it look like a stick figure, or come out as a stick figure, but it's not an entity. It's just like it could be like a lamppost or anything. So it's a piece of equipment that investigators use, myself, to solve cases. And we also like it's a long conversation about SLS, but it's just basically a simple piece of equipment. I've also used a spirit box. I'm sure you're familiar with those. Yeah.
I have heard of them, but as a clinical as a clinician, let's just say, the approach is, you're there as a helper, right? As an interventionist to help this person suffering. And
Help
if
him and investigate the issue.
now
Like I
here's
said,
Christina's calling. Let me answer this real quick, and hold on just a second.
Almost yes, the whole time. Yes.
Have I been
Yeah,
muted all
so if
that
you were,
time?
yeah, so if you were responding to Patrick, who I think has actually left the call, yeah, we didn't hear what you said. So if you could maybe give us a summary of that, that'd be great. Of what
Okay.
your recommendations were.
Yeah, she's calling back, but I'm not going to accept it because it's just not wanting to merge. The calls aren't. So, what I wanted to share with this audience as far as what's continuing is that over the years that she's been incarcerated, these subtle kinds of things have happened. And things, a picture behind everybody be facing one direction, and maybe something stressful is happening. It's always stressful, something stressful that triggers it. A picture will just fall off the wall, or a book falls off the table. And nobody can really see her do anything. So she tries to like not make any indication that she had anything to do with what just happened. And it was just like, oh, okay, well, everybody looks around. Oh, I wonder what that was. But when she's in her cell, sometimes if she sometimes has a new cellmate and they're not so nice, she said sometimes things will bump around in the cellmate's locker, just kind of bump around during the night. And usually that cellmate wants to change the next day. But that's what I mean by how subtle and how elusive, really, these things are to catch. If we continue to try to approach the paranormal with what we would call conventional science, we're never going to understand it. It turns out, Christina has met a few years ago. She was able to meet her biological family through a website in which her half sister was looking for her. And so, lo and behold, it runs in the family. This is another very remarkable discovery. Her half sister said that their mother and their grandmother both had paranormal events like this happened around them all the time. The grandmother was able to control it so well that and it wasn't highly publicized, around the community, as we would guess, but she would do parlor tricks for the grandchildren when they came over, and they would say, Grandma, make the teacup move, and she would make her teacup move across the table. Or, for example, with her mother, though, because of the drugs, I guess, and she's a very aggressive type person. She always had incidences, according to her half sister, that would happen when she was very angry. And again, it would be like a picture would just fall off the wall and crash on the floor, or something would fall off something and break. But you never saw it happen. You would only know it after it happened. But again, so, what I would like to consider, and Brian says he's going to help me, and maybe you too, Nan, is to write an updated case study of her, in which the nature and the characteristics of the RSPK and PK are so subtle and benign that, number one, there's nothing to be afraid of. And as far as there being actual ghosts and poltergeists that are measurable and have any responsibility in psychokinesis or RSPK, I don't know that. I never had any experience, and we never tried to measure for that as any kind of factor in what was happening. It was also obviously that she could create these effects, that we didn't feel like we needed to look any further like that. Although I know people feel those ways. And again, I believe that if we we will learn a whole lot more if we listen to people's experiences and we take them as a projection of their own psyche that can, in fact, take physical form, like psychokinesis, or even an apparition. To me, like, what's the difference between that and a hologram? There's so little we still know about the brain and our electromagnetic energy and neurology, that and electrochemical neurological experience. So I say, let's listen to our patients. Let's use the information to try to help relieve the suffering of the patient. If the patient somehow or another finds some sort of gestalt or some way of understanding their own psyche through their experience, I say, like Patrick was asking, well, be there to guide, and remember that you're there for that patient. We're not really there to prove through normal scientific methods so much as we are to offer relief. So I hope Brian and Jerry and Nan and anybody else, that we can come up with some way of being able to be with the world of people who have these experiences, and that it be credible and also effective.
I think I love what you're saying, and I think there is work going on in the UK where there's more of an emphasis on phenomenal. I don't know what I'm doing to my video. I'm sorry. They're doing more phenomenological work where they're doing that the whole point is to listen and to understand. And there's a lot of folks over there as well, and there's a few that are going to be talking in this ParaMOOC too about the clinical clinical psychology, therapy, and counseling ethos, and how important that is. And you can see that in Rogo's books back in the 80s about where do you have that line of what you're going to do to help a person as opposed to try and get evidence that you want or need for some other purpose. It's not necessarily going to be good for the person that you're working with. So definitely Brian and I and Jerry should keep talking to you on that. Darcy has had her hand up for a little while, so if you want to turn on your video and unmute yourself and ask your question to Jeannie.
Yeah, Jeannie, thank you for sharing your casework with us, and I really appreciate that. Those of us who have been looking at poltergeist cases for a while have obviously looked at the Tina Rush, and I apologize about the camera. The camera is doing strange things right now. But one of the things I was curious about, and I don't know if anybody else could answer that question or if you have anything in your case notes. At the time of this case, there was an introduction of the experiences of ADHD. And I was wondering if Tina had ever had an evaluation for that, or Amber had ever had an evaluation for that, or had they taken any medication to help with that phenomenon, or can you say anything to that?
Not ADHD. Now surface EEG didn't show anything, which is not surprising, but it is true, and that seizure disorder runs in her family. And so neurology, when they evaluated her just through a behavioral profile, said that they believed that she did exhibit signs of seizure activity, but not anything that was noticeable enough to even warrant medication or anything like that. And that was strictly just the way she would describe her physiological symptoms. She does have, like when people have seizures, they can feel them with the aura in their head and that kind of thing. And she would have those kinds of somatic experiences a lot. And also, again, the stomach, the vagal agitation in her abdominal area. So I always, and the intense energy to me was like someone who did not have a good filter over the just ongoing expression of energy, what we would kind of call life force, or your energy as a person. She was just very intense, a very pleasant, loving person, but very intense energy, a lot of power in her. You could sense in her energy. And one point I described that working in physical rehabilitation, of course, I've worked with a lot of brain injuries and neurological problems, and seen a lot of seizures, all kinds, from the very mild to very severe to death. And one thing about a seizure is that there is a whole lot of force being expressed into the body when you have a grand mal seizure. You can break bones and you can die from a seizure. I have little children that have died just from such a severe seizure. So, and when you think about the way the body contorts during a seizure and the neurological effects of a seizure, that's a lot of psychic energy. I don't know how else to describe it, that appears to be trying to, it's not being regulated by the body normally, and it's coming out through the body in these very forceful ways. So in my very limited understanding of physics and electromagnetism and all that, I'm saying, well, what if her seizure activity is, she's able, it gets expressed through her electromagnetic field out into the objects around her.
So
And
did Amber?
whenever
I'm sorry.
and with Amber,
Mhm.
we never saw anything that moved or anything like that around her. But her energy was just so intense that she never, and it wasn't, she could sit down and be focused. She could color a picture. She was as smart as a whip. She could say her ABCs at 3 years old. You know, she sang songs. And developmentally, she was fine. And she did not act hyperactive. It was just that when she moved, it was just with such intense energy, such a force of energy that when she fell the first time and hit her head, and Tina and I would say, we were concerned that she was going to really hurt herself one day, because when she fell so hard, and she did fall a lot. And we believed that that was because she has that same energy. And we were watching to see if anything else was going to happen around her. But otherwise, no. Developmentally, she did not appear to be that way. She played with other children fine. You know, she wasn't aggressive. She wasn't, she didn't talk nonstop, and she didn't act in the typical ways. More, I say this is like an energy that's has to do with the brain, similar to epilepsy.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you for the
Isela,
question.
It's a very good question. Isela, yeah, you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, everyone from Costa Rica. First time here. Yeah,
Where in Costa Rica?
yeah,
Where?
in San Jose.
Oh, in San Jose. Well,
Yeah.
I used to have a place in Guanacaste,
Oh, really? That's a beautiful, beautiful song.
Nosara.
Yeah, very beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, all this that you mentioned made a lot of sense. We had a case last December. What we think, we're almost sure that he's the PK agent. He had epilepsy, he is autistic, and also has got the Tourette syndrome. So we have videos, and every time, I mean, his epilepsy was a bit hard to control. It's like he has a mutation in a gene, and they were like struggling with the medication, like to see what was best for him. So he had really, really heavy crisis sometimes. And it appeared that the RSPK phenomena increased when he had the seizures. Unfortunately, the family was really scared, and the parents, well, they moved because they thought the house was haunted. It was hard for them to understand what we explained, that it was possibly the child and all of his conditions, and that it was natural phenomena. Anyway, my question goes, I would like to know more about what you know about the autistic, epileptic, and all these conditions together, and what it may do to RSPK, because it was hard for me to get literature on that. There are some papers, but it was hard. And the other thing is, if there's a proper way or a best way to deal with the parents, because it would have been really interesting to learn more about the case. And since they left that house and they associated everything with the house, they wanted to stop with the investigation and all that. So that's my little question.
So you don't know if it's continued or not?
Apparently, it stopped. I think that the house, because it belonged to a grandparent that was very weird, and they thought it was haunted and all that. I think the house was a trigger also for the child,
Mm-hmm.
and he was scared there. And since they left and he got his proper medications and the seizures stopped, everything like calmed down. So that's what we know.
Well, you
But
may
we haven't
have
seen the child anymore.
you may have a case that is going to become a longitudinal study for you as well.
Yeah, we're
What I
hoping.
would do if I were you is approach the family and as a person who is have been working with their son and
Mhm.
cares about him. How's he doing? Would love to continue to see him to just help him, with managing his medical problems and counseling him, about his medical problems, because I'm sure that brings him a lot of social,
Mhm.
problems and other
Yeah.
kinds of mental despair, maybe things like that. And I would drop the PK stuff for a while,
Yeah.
but don't let him go, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
Don't.
sometimes we keep in touch because I I studied the parapsychological part and the research, but I'm also from a paranormal investigation team, and they call the team. So this is like two different things that I do, and because they thought the house was haunted, and since there is that we started working with the child. He also mentioned really interesting things about being able to connect like with higher, I don't know, higher self or higher entities and angels. He used to mention a lot of about angels. So I think it's I don't know. People with all those capacities may have, I don't know, a glimpse to other places. I don't know. But yeah. That was my question.
Now we're getting into religion.
Yeah. But it
And at
was
that point, I believe that, we have so much paranormal built into most of our religions that sanctioned paranormal activity, right? Miracles, healing, speaking in tongues, other angels, like you said, things like that. That if you want to be entirely a psychologist about everything, you can say, well, our religion is, well, it teaches us how to get along with each other, right? And care about each other. But it also, is a way that I think people have used, just a layperson, to be able to live out their own psyches and their own ways of understanding the natural world, even when it doesn't seem very understandable. And I think that's kind of the definition of God, right? So I always work with religious beliefs. I grew up in a very religious family, and I will say, well, that's the way your religion teaches you. So, what do usually when their religious symbols are used or archetypes, then there's always something that's being said to the person, right? The angel has a message. The devil, whoever shows up, right? And so that to me is where we belong. Is what is our patient hearing? And is that, can we use that, and can we take that as a genuine, just as much as a Gestalt Rorschach test, as a genuine projection of that person's psyche and whatever distress is happening in their psyche, maybe currently or even from their past. That makes sense. And then as far as the medical stuff, I think that is a great way to maintain a relationship, because when I worked, one of the areas in psychology that I've worked was in health psychology or medical psychology, wellness psychology. And I counseled people that had medical problems and, all the adjustment problems and the learning to live with their medical problems that is needed. And if this is a child, usually parents appreciate some support like that, like somebody their child can talk to just about their medical problems. Then that might be a good way to keep him around. But I would keep him around as much as possible, because as he gets older and he gets away from parents, and
Thank
he
you very
has
much.
epilepsy
Yes.
already, then my guess is that it's what I believe probably could be happening in the literature, and why we hear nothing else in the literature, is that people just don't want to tell anybody after a while. They just like she's so used to things happening even while incarcerated that it just okay, that's just who I am. I'm not she doesn't want to talk about it to anybody, right? So that's why if I were you, I'd hang on to him, because when he becomes an adult, you may be the one person in his life that can make some sense of his life.
Thank you. We will try to keep them. Well, they reach out sometimes. No, everything is going well. Since we left the house, everything is fine. So, but thank you very much.
No more seizures?
No, after they found the correct type of medicines for his type of epilepsy. Since as I mentioned, he's had a mutation on one of his genomes. I have all the genetic study, and it's very interesting. It's like 1 in a million kind of condition. So that's why it was so hard for them to find out what medication, what combination was work better for him. But he's fine now, apparently. Yeah.
Well, with medication, it may suppress that energy enough, or keep him stable. Where with her seizure activity wasn't enough to require medication, so she does take psychotropic meds for depression and anxiety. But
okay. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, thank you for that question, Estella. It was a really wonderful conversation. Does anyone else have any? And thank you, Jeannie, for bringing all this understanding of how to do things and what the problems are and so on. It's just wonderful. Does anyone have any other questions? Morgan had a question, but she needed to get going, and Darcy had to take off as well. So anyone else have anything to ask Jeannie? Going once, going twice. Margaret, did you have a question? Your mic is open.
Well, I'm surprised everybody could hang in as long as they did. So.
Well, I think it's wonderful. I mean, it's almost 90 minutes, and we're some of us, at least half of us, are still here. So that's
yeah,
fantastic.
no.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right about the different agendas of people who are trying to help and people who are trying to do experimentations. I love that picture of Cedar Creek, because that was Steve Bauman, I think, wasn't it? And Ed Kelly was part of that group as well. John Hartwell possibly as well, back in the 80s. And those guys were kind-hearted and lovely people, but they weren't really. I think I know Ed very well, and I think he's a hell of a good listener now. And Steve got that way as he got older. But I think a lot of us were in this position where we were looking for the evidence and not looking for the health of the people that were talking to us. And there's more of that wellness understanding and need in the field now, than especially in the UK programs. Than I ever remember from the 80s and even early 90s. And I think that's really important. I think Carlos used to always say that more people in the field were more interested in spontaneous experiences and really wanted to listen to people, but it was like not what you were supposed to be doing, kind of a thing. And Chuck Honorton and that generation before were, very, very worried about experimental methods and so on. Although I must say, Bill and Brian, you can chime in. I think Bill Roll did this wonderful thing where he was doing both things. He was trying to bring a mixed method there that yes, you were measuring and so on, but you also cared a lot about the person that was showing experiences and so on. And I also thought it was very interesting, your comments about her family. We had a colleague in Edinburgh, Sherry Cohen Simmons, who did her PhD on second sight in the Highlanders. And part of what she was doing, was before a lot of the genetic stuff was able to be done. She was doing these lists of families who could tell you how many, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather had these experiences and so on, and trying to look at families where that was a tradition in the family, which just lets us know that there are things about us that dispose us to being able to do that or no. But I find Christina's story to be so tragic, and in a way it's a little heroic, because she's managing her experience in a way that keeps her from being used in a way, or have terrible experiences because of what she's kind of incorporating it into the life that she's living now. So I think she's got a very, very good friend in you, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Well,
And thank you again for having me. And I think everybody's probably ready to wrap it up.
I think they